Yeah.
And so it was a really creative idea. It resulted in a huge number of advances that we were able to make and others in the field were able to make. But, it's not going to happen, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't useful uh, trying to make it happen because again, it's just like the creativity that we talked about earlier when you're having free play,
Hmm.
when you have something that's so ambitious, that's these kind of transitional or frontier projects, you have to create things in order to get there. And so, in the process of trying to create these motors, we created all these other machines and tools and all these other things that people around the world are using now.
This episode of the Smart Athlete Podcast is brought to you by Solpre, skincare for athletes. Whether you're in the gym, on the mats, on the road, or in the pool, we protect your skin so you're more comfortable in your own body. To learn more, go to solpre.com.
Welcome to the Smart Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Jesse Funk. My guest today, although he's wearing a coat, is in beautiful Davis, California. He is the head of the Functional Molecular Biology Lab and a professor at UC Davis. He has his PhD in physiology and lots of research papers to his name. Welcome to the show, Keith Baar.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah,
Um,
I didn't know. I didn't know you were gonna do a YouTube video of it, or else I probably would have hid the down jacket that I'm wearing when it's like 70 degrees outside. But
It's okay. Hey, kind of adds to the mystery of what's happening at Davis. Why you're in a coat when it's 70 degrees
yeah.
outside.
Why is a Canadian wearing a coat while he's in California? That's just not good. All
Yeah,
right.
I mean, like, doesn't that come like inborn where you're born in Canada, you never need a coat, you can just go outside at any temperature and be
Yeah,
fine.
pretty much. Pretty much. Oh well. So much for that theory.
So I've kind of listened to various interviews you've done. You've done several different podcasts, and I listened to one of your lectures I think you gave last year. Um, but I haven't quite figured out what you did growing up. Did you play hockey like a typical Canadian, or what kind of like sport background did you have growing up?
Yeah, so I did not play hockey. I was one of the rare Canadians who didn't.
Okay.
We're now a growing number of Canadians who play basketball. So I played basketball for years and years. I got up probably over 1,000 shots every day and did a lot of work to try and get really good at it. And so had some success, but it was kind of mediocre success. So.
Okay.
But then, of course, I went to the University of Michigan as an undergraduate, and the year that I went there, I was gonna, the plan was to try out for the team and to make the team, and all of, yeah, that team went on to win the national championship that year. So it was
Okay.
a little difficult. And one of the guys that I was there with was a guy named Eric Riley, and we would go to the gym and we'd play together. And I'd be like, yeah, I got about the same kind of skill level as this guy.
Mm-hmm.
But he's 7'2", so I don't think I'm going to do quite as well. So,
A little bit. How tall are you?
I'm 6'2", but that's not really
Yeah.
tall enough
Yeah.
for much of anything.
Yeah. It's kind of a tough range. It's you. I'm just trying to think. You really kind of be a little bit shorter for, I'll say, the average like professional runner. If you went the opposite direction, kind of went endurance sports like I do, and then yeah, basketball you need to be a little bit taller. But you're in this kind of land where you are. I think I by general measures are tall. It's not like
Yeah. So I'm tall enough so that I have to play like forward when I play pickup basketball,
right.
but I was a point guard. So, and that's about what I should be given my height. So,
Yeah.
so it is a very difficult thing to play at a variety of different levels. But yeah, so I did that. I also played volleyball in college because growing up in Canada, we had outstanding physical education, and I had a great PE teacher who had played as a national team player for the Czech Republic, or for Czechoslovakia as it was called at that time. He was a Czech national volleyball player. So he trained us extraordinarily well in gym for playing volleyball. So even though I didn't really play that too much, I was able to jump onto a college team because he had trained us that well.
Was that a club team or was that actually?
Yeah, it was a club team, but
Okay.
still it was good. We played we played against a lot of varsity teams. Oops. And so the varsity teams would, we would still be able to be competitive with them. So it
Yeah.
was good.
Yeah, I was like, I hadn't really thought about men's volleyball. I mean, obviously, it's played all over the place. Funny enough, my guest from 2 weeks ago, Will McGough, wrote a book. I had him on talking about the book, and he also played club in college. And I was like, I
Yeah.
didn't even have it in my mind that was, a thing going on. Like,
Yeah, it's one of those interesting things where in the U.S. women's volleyball is the key sport,
right.
and there's clubs from when you're 10 years old, and yet the women aren't the ones who win gold medals. The U.S. men actually are better at winning medals historically than the women are, even though they don't actually have a program, and that really tells you something about kind of elite sport is that if you actually don't have as much structured time, you probably create creativity and you improve your skills by creating them yourself rather than doing what the coaches tell you. And I think that's one of the reasons why the men's team actually at the national level tends to do extraordinarily well, given that there's no infrastructure in the US really
Right.
for men's volleyball.
So is it a matter of just like throw the couch out the window, get together and play?
That's the ideal thing to do when you're a kid.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
worst thing in the world is to have like grown-ups there if you're playing sport as a kid, because you're gonna do things and they'll tell you what to do, and then you start doing what they tell you instead of figuring out a different way of doing it and coming up with creative ways to do things that are then going to make you exceptional once you get a little bit older.
Yeah. See, I know I've thought about that in terms of like injury risk, thinking about not starting kids too early on weights and those kind of things. But I hadn't thought about it in terms of skill acquisition. So, I mean, is there like a preferred age where you say, okay, now you're old enough to need a coach or for a coach to, progress your skills?
Uh, if you talk to David Epstein and you read his book Range, he would say that the more diverse things you do, the better you're going to be in the long run.
Okay.
And that's certainly true for sport. So we know that most of the most creative players, like if you look at a Messi or you look at all of these guys, yeah, they were in a club from about 11-ish, but before that they were playing just on the street wherever they could. And most of the play that they would do, even though they were on a club team, would be out in the street or in a park with nobody watching. They could try a lot of things. And you go to South America and they say that the worst thing that's happened to their football skills is that they've put in a bunch of really nice parks that have like a flat astroturf or artificial turf surface. Because in the old days, they used to have bumps and all of this stuff, and you had to get good on a really bad surface. So you had to be even better to handle the ball. And so all of those things really kind of indicate that for your creative later end, the long view, where you're going to get to as your maximum, the more time you have as kind of free play and as creative time, where you're encouraged to try crazy things, the better your upside is going to be.
So I feel like that's a really good example of whenever my coach gives me kind of, also I'll call it interesting workouts. He always says diverse workouts make diverse athletes. Like the whole key is not necessarily doing this exact thing, but let's do something a little bit different and that's a little more stimulating.
Yeah, because after a certain period of time, the tissues of the body need a different stimulus in order to adapt.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to jump a little bit into your research. It seems like you kind of made a transition over time. I believe, was you doing a TEDx talk at Davis talking about exercise and happiness.
Right.
And then now, the more recent stuff, we're talking about tendon strength and kind of more focused, it seems like, into, I'll say functional molecular biology, but I'll call it more technical rather than more easily adapted to like pop culture. how do you get from kind of where you were? I think that was like 2011 to where you are now.
Yeah,
What's
so the lecture I gave, the TEDx lecture, that was just something that basically is a general physical activity component.
okay?
So how do you live the longest, happiest life possible? And that's there's this idea that exercise is going to do a lot of things to promote that. But my PhD was in muscle physiology. I was a molecular biologist and really coming up with the molecular mechanism underlying why a muscle grows in response to lifting weights.
Okay.
And then I went on to work with John Halsey and discovered a specific gene that was activated by endurance exercise that basically causes all of the endurance adaptation. So a gene called PGC1 alpha. I was able to show that that PGC1 alpha was activated when you did endurance exercise, and that you actually produced a smaller version of it that was more active, and that a lot of what you get when you do endurance adaptations or when you do endurance training and your body adapts to that is actually that you turn on this gene and it increases your mitochondrial mass, it increases your fat oxidation capacity, and it increases your ability or the number of capillaries within the muscle. So a lot of these things that you would consider endurance adaptations are down to that one gene. So most of the time I had been working in muscle, trying to really understand how muscle is responding to exercise, nutrition, and age. Mm-hmm. And then what we started doing at a certain point, I went to a postdoc with this incredibly smart guy named Bob Dennis at the University of Michigan. And what he was doing was engineering muscles. So we make muscles in a dish. And what we had discovered is that and the reason we were doing this is because we wanted to build machines that had muscles as the motors for the machine. And what we had discovered is that whenever you attach a muscle to a machine, it would always fail at the attachment between the muscle and the machine. Okay. You would suture it on, you'd sew it on, and then that would be where the muscle would tear off. And so we decided that in order to really build a machine that used muscles, you had to have that transitional tissue, the tendon. And so we started looking into kind of what was the physiology of tendon, and what was its role, and how did it function to protect muscle from injury. Mm-hmm. And so and over the years we're still working on molecular mechanisms underlying a lot of the muscle responses to exercise, nutrition, and age. But we've started to pay more and more attention to tendons and ligaments and fascia, because what we're realizing is that these tissues are as important or more important for performance, because those are the tissues that are going to determine whether you are healthy or injured. And if you're healthy and you can train more, mm-hmm. the likelihood of you performing at a high level is higher. Okay. And so for us, those are the key things.
As we kind of go through this, just pretend that I'm a freshman, essentially. I'm doing my best to digest all your stuff, but obviously you can speak at this a much higher level than me. So okay. I'll try my best to ask, purposeful questions here. So I want to back up just a little bit. So sure. What was the purpose of trying to make a machine with muscles? Is that in the sense of we can't find a better mechanism to operate, I'll say the future of robotics, or what was the point of that?
Essentially, some of that was actually funded by the Department of Defense, and okay. With the idea that if you were going to do long-term space flight, or you're doing really long missions or voyages, what you would do is you would want to have a machine that could fix itself. Okay. And muscle, if there's any damage, it can self-regenerate or it can self-repair. Okay. And so the idea was to generate something that could be a self-regulating, self-repairing mm-hmm. Motor that could power these long-term space flights. And again, part of what grant funding is there for is to really open up completely, incredibly unimaginable areas. Right. Because nobody would ever think of, let's just power these spaceships with muscles. Not necessarily something most people would think of, but somebody had this idea that, well, if we could do it, then we'd have basically a machine that could basically work forever. And all right. we'd have to do is supply it with energy.
Yeah.
And so it was a really creative idea. It resulted in a huge number of advances that we were able to make, and others in the field were able to make. But it's not going to happen. But it doesn't mean that it wasn't useful trying to make it happen. Because again, it's just like the creativity that we talked about earlier. When you're having free play,
Mm-hmm.
when you have something that's so ambitious, that's these kind of transitional or frontier projects, you have to create things in order to get there. And so in the process of trying to create these motors, we created all these other machines and tools and all these other things that people around the world are using now.
Yeah. Well, it seems like sometimes from the various kind of professors and people doing research I've spoken to, oftentimes you kind of go down a rabbit hole, and then that will be the genesis of, maybe even the next 10 years of somebody's research, because they'll say, oh, but wait, well, what about this problem within this problem? And then it, kind of spawns off, on a whole other path. I think I saw, please correct me, but that you have or are working on trying to like recreate tendons
Mm-hmm.
for people. Was
Yeah.
that kind of
So
a spun off from there?
we have so we've engineered ligaments, and that was spun off from the muscle work.
Okay.
Because when you're trying to attach a muscle to a machine, you need to have something like a tendon or a ligament.
Right.
So rather than start with a tendon, which is a bone, tendon, and a muscle, so 3 tissues, we started with a bone, a tendon, and a bone, which is a ligament, which is only 2 tissues, so it was a little bit easier.
Right.
And so we've been engineering ligaments now for probably about 15 years. And so they're super cool tissues and they have given us a huge amount of information as to everything from nutrition, loading, all of these types of things we've learned from having made ligaments in a dish that we can now have complete control over. Mm-hmm. So I can take blood out of your body after you've done certain exercise or after you've eaten a certain meal, and I can isolate the serum and put it into our engineered ligaments. And I can tell you in a week's time whether what you ate or what you did is going to make your tendons and ligaments bigger, stronger, and more resilient.
Okay.
So we've got a huge number of tools now.
What are those the artificial tendons created out of? Is it the same kind of cellular structure, or is it a different material?
So these are human ligaments. So basically, what we do is we take. So we're in Davis. We're about an hour and a half from Lake Tahoe. Mm-hmm. World-class skiing. So about this time of year, people are getting all excited. They're going up and skiing. They're going to come down the hill with a ruptured ACL. They're going to go to our medical center and get it replaced. And as they're getting it replaced, we get the remnant of the tissue.
Okay.
And so that remnant of the tissue has the human ACL fibroblasts, which are dedicated cells that are the cells that make the ligament.
Okay.
So we then just take away all of the collagen, the protein there, isolate the cells, and now we can use those cells to make ligaments in our laboratory. And so from a single individual, we can make about 1,000 engineered ligaments.
Okay. So this is a kind of a pure personal curiosity, but how do you how does that tissue get stored, or does it have a shelf life, or like how does that aspect work?
Yeah, so we normally will take our tissue, and the same day we'll digest it down, and we'll isolate the cells, and the cells will start growing that day.
Yeah.
So they'll attach to a dish and grow. We've also done it from cadaveric tissue, so from people who have passed away. Mm-hmm. They've donated their body to science, and as part of that, their tendons and ligaments will get put into a media, and we've been able to isolate functional cells from ligaments from people who had been dead for 45 days. So the cells within your tendons and ligaments, they're not really metabolically highly active. They can be kept alive relatively easily. Once we have the cells, then what we do is we freeze those cells down in liquid nitrogen in a special solution that protects them from damage. And then anytime we want to use a vial of those cells, we just thaw them out and we start growing them again.
Okay. So it's effectively, I'll say, an almost indefinite period of time that you have those for use.
Yeah, pretty much. As long as they stay at minus 180 degrees.
Right.
in liquid nitrogen, we'll be able to use them. If there are fluctuations in temperature, the cells deteriorate.